and welcome to VEDA. So we are coming to a close. We are in the final week of VEDA, and I just now finished the fourth book of the Dark Tower series, Wizard and Glass. This was another reread. I've read the first four Dark Tower books before. What I did different this time was I read The Stand in between books 2 and 3, because there's that moment where Roland's quartet travels into the Kansas of the plague-ridden world of The Stand. That is where Roland tells his tale, which is the majority of this book. Most of the events of this book do not take place in the present, they take place in the past. This is where we find out what happens to Roland right after he faces off with his teacher Court to become a gunslinger, which was a whole plot set in motion by Martin, the evil wizard, to get him out of the way. Didn't quite work the way he planned, because Roland actually did become a gunslinger, and then he was sent on kind of a mission by his father. Now, initially this mission was meant merely as a way to get him out of the way, knowing that Martin was kind of gunning for him. But it turns into an epic tale all on its own. So we get to see Roland at the age of 14, having just earned his guns, going off to this far, far off place to essentially kind of keep tabs on the local populace. And what we wind up seeing is, a classic Western tale of, a small town with a lot of big secrets. But being a Stephen King book, they also make it a little strange, because, you have the witch, Rhea, and you have the first hint of Marilyn's rainbow. And, of course, there is the most important part of Roland's story, which is the love that he finds with a girl named Susan. There are a number of tales that have clearly inspired King's writing of this particular book. One of the main ones is The Wizard of Oz. There are several westerns came to mind as I was reading it. There's a little bit of Romeo and Juliet in there. It becomes such a fascinating tale, because you're seeing this young boy of 14 becoming, he's proven his manhood in this society, and now he's being sent off to actually prove his manhood as far as dealing with adult situations. And whether that was fully intended by his father or not, that's where Roland finds himself. And the reason he's telling his quartet this whole story now is because a lot of what is coming has to do with what has already come before. Also, because we're in the world of The Stand, we also get the return of Randall Flagg, who, as it turns out, and this will be a spoiler if you haven't read the book, so stop now, but if you have, which I would think if you've come this far in my reviews, I would hope you're, reading along with me, but that's not necessarily a requirement, but just so you know, this is going to be a bit of a spoiler, that Randall Flagg is Martin Broadcloak. That's exactly what Roland calls him when they find him in the Emerald Palace. But now we're done with book 4, and while this story has now been told, the quartet has to move on back to the path of the beam, on to the Dark Tower. This was a nice little rest for our gang while they heard Roland's tale. It's interesting the way it's set up, and the thing is, which I know I need to review the Dark Tower movie fully. I only did that first thoughts video. But for me, honestly, I probably would have done 14-year-old Roland as the very first story. Done it and not even call it a Dark Tower movie. Just, produce it as is and just put it out there, and then, go back to it later when you realize that, this 14-year-old kid is going to become the gunslinger of the Gunslinger and the rest of the Dark Tower books. But, these decisions aren't up to me yet. So, we get what we had with the Dark Tower movie, which I'll talk about in another video. So, yeah. Anyway, so now I've finished Wizarding Glass. I'm going to take a small break from the Dark Tower series and Stephen King's multiverse to read some shorter works. I just need a break. You know, I'm still fully engaged in reading this, but these, you know, they're all very long books, and you just kind of need kind of a palate cleanser would be the way to put it, I guess. You know, you've just finished a hearty meal. So now you need something light to just kind of, you know, settle things. And that's where I am. But after my brief break in that, I'm going to jump on Eyes of the Dragon, finally. And then I will be all caught up in Randall Flagg. And from there, I'm actually going to take another step sideways. Still a Stephen King book, but once again, only a book related to the Dark Tower and not directly in line with the quest for the Tower. Which is these 4 remaining books, which includes Wind Through the Keyhole. But after Eyes of the Dragon, I'm going to pick up Salem's Lot, which I've actually never read and I've never seen the miniseries of. So I'm definitely looking forward to that because it's one of those things I've always wanted to read it and watch the miniseries. And I think every time I considered watching the miniseries, it was one of those, like, since I hadn't seen it yet, I was like, ooh, I want to read the book first. And then I just never found the time, as so often happens with me especially. But, you know, now that I'm in the world of the Dark Tower and deeply invested in Stephen King's multiverse, and knowing full well that we're going to see some familiar faces from Salem's Lot in future Dark Tower books, it's time to give Salem's Lot a little read. So next up on the Dark Tower project list is going to be Eyes of the Dragon, and then Salem's Lot, and then I think there's actually a few short stories that are also connected to later books. Then I'm going to jump back into Wind Through the Keyhole. And then I think from there it's almost a straight shot. There might be 1 or 2 books along on the side, but we'll, you know, cross those bridges when we come to them. That's really it. I don't want to go too in-depth in talking about Wizarding Glass because I'll give too many spoilers and kind of ruin it for you. Just know that if you're looking for continued Path to the Dark Tower stories, this one might be a bit disappointing to you because it takes such a giant step back into the past. Now, this is an important story that needs to be told, and that's exactly why Roland sits his quartet down and says, okay, it's time for me to tell you this, and then tells everything that happened to him at the age of 14. It's so wonderfully written, and I love the characters. I love Roland's friends, Alain and Cuthbert. Cuthbert especially. You have these, like, truly epic characters like Rhea of the Coos and Eldred Jonas, and you finally get to hear more about the good man, John Farson, and the war that he's trying to start. Actually, no, the war's going on, just it's not like fully, it's small skirmishes, it's not like the full-fledged, like, out battle, but you get the hints of what Farson's plan is. So, that's going to be it for me today. As always, I hope you're all well, and I'll see you tomorrow.